For centuries, the story of Pompeii has been framed as a tragedy of absolute, instantaneous preservation. The traditional narrative describes a sunny August day in 79 AD, where a thriving Roman metropolis was suddenly and completely frozen by volcanic ash. When 19th century archaeologists first excavated the site, they interpreted the ruins and the victims through the lens of their own cultural assumptions. They saw the spatial layouts of the city and the huddling victims as reflections of modern, romanticized family structures. But 18 months of high-resolution scientific analysis has replaced this simplified narrative with a much more complex timeline. We now know that the destruction of Pompeii was a multi-phase geological crisis, followed by centuries of precarious human survival that the history books missed. This timeline maps the 31-hour eruptive sequence. The nightmare began with an 18 to 20-hour plenian phase, dropping a steady, relentless accumulation of pumice over the city, causing widespread roof collapses. Eventually, the fallout stopped. Stratigraphic data identifies a temporary lull in the eruption. Deceived by this pause, survivors emerged from their shelters to navigate the pumice-choked streets in a desperate attempt to escape. By stepping outside, they were caught in the lethal Pleian phase. The eruptive column collapsed, initiating 17 distinct pyroclastic density currents. These ground-hugging avalanches of incandescent rock and toxic gases moved at hurricane velocities, subjecting the remaining population to extreme thermal shock. Stratigraphic analysis reveals that Pompeii's residents spent 20 hours navigating a collapsing city before the first thermal surges arrived. Their deaths were the result of a calculated risk to escape during a geological lull, rather than an instantaneous volcanic event. As organic tissues decomposed beneath meters of hardened ash, they left behind precise negative voids. Archaeologists filled these cavities with liquid plaster, capturing the exact physical contours of the victims' final moments. For decades, excavators identified these groups as traditional nuclear families, based entirely on their physical proximity to one another. In November 2024, a landmark study successfully extracted ancient DNA from the skeletal material embedded within these casts. This genetic data allowed researchers to test the familial assumptions that had defined these victims for over a century. In the House of the Golden Bracelet, 4 victims huddled beneath a staircase were historically identified as a mother, father, and 2 children. The genomic data revealed that the adult wearing the ornate bracelet was biologically male, and he bore no genetic relationship to either of the children. Physical proximity during the chaos of a disaster does not equate to biological kinship. These findings suggest the victims were often unrelated strangers, driven into the same confined spaces by the sheer terror of the eruption. Excavations in early 2025 uncovered a sprawling private thermal bath complex in Regio 9. Masterfully engineered to accommodate 30 guests at once, it replicated the sophisticated infrastructure of Rome's massive public spas. Wealthy Pompeians weaponized this domestic luxury to secure political endorsements and commercial contracts. By guiding guests through the thermal circuit, the host staged an ostentatious display of wealth designed to cultivate social capital. In contrast, excavations at the suburban villa of Civita Juliana highlight the realities for the city's workers. Their quarters were cramped, windowless rooms, measuring a mere 16 square meters, where up to 3 individuals slept on rudimentary beds over raw, rodent-infested earth. Maintaining the water pressure for these elite private baths required enslaved laborers running continuously inside massive wooden treadwheels. The city's legendary leisure and architectural marvels were entirely dependent on the calculated exploitation of an enslaved underclass. Following the eruption, the landscape of Campania was transformed into a toxic, gray desert. But Pompeii was not completely abandoned in 79 AD. While imperial officials managed the crisis and confiscated assets, the ruins became a site of active human reoccupation. Destitute survivors and opportunistic scavengers tunneled back into the ash fields. Because the upper stories of the tallest villas still protruded above the pumice layer, they could establish precarious housing within the recognizable ruins, building the kind of post-apocalyptic camp. As vegetation returned to the volcanic soil, these inhabitants developed a subsistence economy. They repurposed buried ground floors as cellars and installed massive milling stones into old dry cisterns to facilitate bread production for the squatter community. This resilient community endured for nearly 4 centuries. Then, in 472 AD, Mount Vesuvius experienced the massive Phaedra eruption. This triggered high-speed mud flows known as lahars, which deeply eroded the landscape and completely buried the squatter settlement under thick layers of sediment. Pompeii survived the cataclysm of 79 AD as a marginal post-apocalyptic settlement. It was only after this 5th century mudflow that the city was truly, definitively erased from human memory. The act of excavating Pompeii subjects its fragile masonry and frescoes to rapid degradation. Moisture pulls soluble salts to the surface, causing ancient mural paintings to blister and flake away from the walls. To fight this, researchers launched the Repair Project. Its mission is to reconstruct millions of shattered fresco fragments, physical puzzles so complex they are impossible for human teams to manually assemble. Individual fragments undergo high-resolution 3D digitization. Deep learning algorithms analyze their contours and paint patterns to determine the precise geometrical fit. Once solved, bimanual robotic arms equipped with flexible soft hands maneuver and place the fragile fragments with sub-millimeter precision. This symbiosis of computer vision and robotics achieves in days what would traditionally take decades of labor, reclaiming cultural heritage that was shattered by volcanic ash and global warfare. Modern medical technology has also forced an ethical debate regarding the public display of the victims. Global museums are increasingly interrogating our responsibility toward remains collected during periods of profound trauma. To address this, current conservation efforts are replacing original plaster casts with 3D printed transparent resin replicas. These replicas contain no biological material, allowing the original remains to be treated with greater care. By decoupling the biological skeleton from the physical form of the cast, curators allow the public to confront the tragedy of the eruption while treating the victims as individuals once more. The goal of decoding Pompeii is no longer just archaeological discovery, but a commitment to restoring human dignity to those who died in the ash.